Number 3. Lonergan Case. On January 25, 1998, an American couple decided to go on a tourist trip in Australia. Tom and Eileen Lonergan, two amateur divers, joined a group of 24 passengers for a dive at St. Crispin Reef. The tour operator took the boat to the reef on a sunny day, and as usual, everyone put on their wetsuits, checked their gear, and jumped in the turquoise water to enjoy the corals and tropical fish. After about 40 minutes exploring the shallow reef, the couple surfaced near where the boat had dropped them off, only to find, to their terror, that the boat was gone. The crew, making a grave error, had returned to the mainland without realizing Tom and Eileen were still in the water. Alone in the open sea, they saw only the horizon line, a blue immensity in all directions, with no land in sight. They must have immediately understood the gravity of the situation. They had no communication equipment to call for help, only their inflatable vests and masks. To make matters worse, those waters were known to be shark-infested, which heightened their panic even more. In the hours and days that followed, the Lonergans fought to survive. They likely tried to conserve energy, floating rather than wasting strength swimming against the current. They probably took turns keeping each other awake and afloat, avoiding sleep or drinking seawater. But hour by hour, the tropical sun dehydrated them more, while at night hypothermia threatened their lives. They may have imagined the boat would immediately notice their absence by day's end and organize a rescue. But the nightmare was only discovered 2 entire days later. On January 27th, the boat crew found the couple's personal belongings left on board and realized they had never returned. When the alarm was raised, the search for Tom and Eileen was already terribly delayed. Australian authorities mounted a large rescue operation by sea, land, and air. For 3 whole days, many different teams looked for them in the St. Crispin Reef area and surroundings. But it was only on the 4th day that a tragic clue appeared. On the Queensland coast, dozens of kilometers away, a small group of fishermen found a wetsuit. A woman's wetsuit, in a size consistent with Eileen's. Analysis showed it had been in the sea since the day of the disappearance and had tears under the arms, possibly caused by scraping on coral or even bites from fish, indicating that Eileen likely still wore it while struggling to stay afloat. Only 6 months later, in June 1998, that more debris were finally found. The couple's air cylinder, BCD, and other dive gear were found on the coast, 121 kilometers from where they had submerged. But along with their gear was an absolutely terrifying item, a slate used for underwater communication containing a desperate plea for help. On it, Tom and Eileen wrote that they had been abandoned and that no one had come to rescue them. Despite this evidence, the bodies of Tom and Eileen were never recovered. Authorities concluded both perished at sea, probably after a few days of agony. Possible causes include dehydration, delirium, drowning due to exhaustion, or even a shark attack once they were weakened. The case now stands as one of the most avoidable and tragic disappearances in modern history. Number 2. Oceangate Titan. On June 18, 2023, a small group of passengers decided to explore the wrecks of the Titanic at 3,000 meters depth in the North Atlantic in a half-assed submarine. Titan departed its support ship near the Titanic wreck site, beginning its descent with the pilot and 4 paying passengers aboard. Among them were a billionaire explorer, his teenage son, an experienced diver, and a filmmaker, all excited to see the famous wreck up close. The Titan was a small experimental submersible designed by Oceangate, created to carry 5 people to the wrecks of the Titanic for touristic purposes. It had an unusual hull made of carbon fiber and titanium, and incredibly, had not undergone any formal safety certification protocols before departing. The first 90 minutes of descent went normally, with regular text communication with the surface team. Titan was expected to take about 2 hours to reach the Titanic, but around 1 hour 45 minutes into the dive, all contact was suddenly lost. No distress call or warning. The submersible simply stopped responding. But it was only 8 hours after they lost contact with the submarine that the support ship sounded the alarm. A tense international search and rescue operation began, mobilizing the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, Canadian Coast Guard, and various private military vessels and ROVs. For nearly 4 days, sonar swept the depths and aircraft flew overhead, hoping to detect Titan or at least emergency acoustic beacons. The situation drew global attention, with hopes that the 5 occupants might still be alive inside the submersible. But in reality, the tragedy had occurred much earlier. On June 22, 2023, a ROV made a grim discovery about 500 meters from the Titanic's bow. A debris field on the seafloor, including Titan's tail cone and pieces of the hull. What happened was immediately clear. Approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes after the dive began, coinciding with the loss of communications, the submersible had imploded during descent, destroying itself completely and killing everyone on board instantly. The violence of the implosion released energy equivalent to several hundred kilograms of TNT. For the occupants, death was instantaneous and without conscious suffering. The structure compressed faster than neural transmission times. Investigations found multiple human and engineering failures, concluding in October 2023 that the tragedy was avoidable due to negligence and a deficient safety culture at Oceangate. Number 1. USS Indianapolis. On July 30th, 1945, during World War II, the American heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis had just completed a secret mission and was now headed to the Philippines. The ship had successfully transported the uranium nuclei of the first atomic bomb, as well as other components of it, to the Northern Mariana Islands, the same bomb that would be dropped to Hiroshima a week later. Around midnight, the ship was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine in the Pacific Ocean. In just 12 minutes, the Indianapolis broke in two and sank. And of the 1,196 crew aboard, about 900 managed to abandon ship in time and were left adrift in the vast ocean. The horror for these survivors had only just begun. They were in waters infested with oceanic sharks and also had very few lifeboats and vests. Most men floated with only belts or life jackets, many already wounded or burned. In the first hours, sharks were drawn by the chaos, the noise of explosions, banging debris, and above all, the blood of dozens of wounded sailors in the water formed a deadly magnet. On the first night after the sinking, groups of survivors reported that sharks fed on the bodies of dead sailors floating nearby. But at daybreak, with so many living men thrashing in the water, the sharks began attacking the castaways. They came suddenly from below or behind their victims, and a single isolated scream followed by water stained red signaled that another man had been taken. Instinct for survival led the sailors to improvise. They grouped into large circles, placing the wounded or weaker in the center and the stronger on the outside, kicking the water and shouting to try to scare off the predators. When someone died from injuries or exposure, his body was pushed away from the group, hoping the sharks would be distracted by the corpse and spare the living. But unfortunately, the shark attacks were the least of their problems. Because of the extremely hot Pacific sun, hundreds of men suffered extreme thirst and sunburn, and over just a few days in these conditions, most of these men were drove to complete madness. There were reports of mass hallucinations, men drinking seawater and convulsing, or swimming away from the group, raving about imaginary islands. Despite all efforts and collective courage, fewer men remained each day. Many died to wounds and saltwater ingestion before sharks even touched them. For those men, waiting for rescue felt endless and death almost certain. The Indianapolis sank without sending a clear SOS, so the U.S. Navy did not know about the disaster and no search was underway. Only 4 days later, on the morning of August 2nd, 1945, did a patrol plane accidentally spot a group of men and debris. Under approach, the pilot saw tons of oil and dozens of bodies in the water, concluding it was an unknown shipwreck. He immediately dropped a life raft and radioed the news, and that same day, ships were diverted to rescue and began picking up survivors scattered over that vast area. The rescue operation continued until August 3rd, 5 days after the initial accident, when they finally retrieved the last men. The final data was absolutely horrific. Of 1,196 crew, only 317 were rescued alive. Approximately 880 men died in the sinking or in the following days in the water. This episode went down in history as the worst mass shark attack on humans ever recorded and as an unforgettable part of World War II folklore.